from football. But obviously, we had the pretty dreadful news yesterday that several hundred jobs are now at risk at the Exxon Mobil plant at Mossmorran. I won't go into too technical detail about what they do there, but basically they produce ethylene. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And there are two separate plants in Mossmorran, the other which is owned by Shell, and that will continue. But the ExxonMobil operation, which has been going about 40 years, supports around 180 jobs directly, further 250 contractors. Basically, it's curtains by the looks of it. There was a staff-wide meeting yesterday. ExxonMobil said, look, we're pulling out. The cost of energy in the UK is too high. We don't like the UK government's net zero policies, so we're choosing to walk away. Now we know that negotiations with these kind of things take time. Unions still don't know the exact terms of redundancies, so a lot of this is still quite unknown. But Mark, I'll come to you on this. ExxonMobil were very much in the front foot today. Their UK chief was on the radio blaming this squarely on the UK government. But I feel we should point out we're talking about a firm that in the last quarter this year alone made $8 billion in revenue. So this isn't exactly some like little family-run operation that's counting the pennies.
No.
So is it fair, should we be giving this like American company, the benefit of the doubt here?
Their only motivation in all things is the top line and profit, and so it should be. They're a private company. They're entitled to arrange their affairs to make maximum profit for their shareholders. That's how capitalism works. However, this they have a point in a way in that if the people who run Britain and Scotland are going to make life hard for traditional fossil fuel based companies, they have to understand that there's a consequence to that, and that consequence in many cases will be massive job losses. And what they need to do is be honest about the fact that a couple of wind farms dotted about the place isn't going to replace thousands and thousands of really well paid jobs. I've got a friend who is a lagger and worked at Grangemouth. He done a refit at Mossmorran. He's telling me about guys he knows. They're all going to have to go down to England to get work. Now, you can't just get rid of a whole tranche of jobs like that with green levies and all the rest of it without a just transition plan so that there's good, well-paid jobs to replace them. So, in a word, I think the politicians have made a mistake here, and I think they've got to sort it out. Exxon, on the other hand, are just doing what capitalists do. They're just bastards.
You can't expect charity from a company like that. I mean, obviously the parallels, while not exact, but on the face of it, with the shutdown of the oil refinery at Grangemouth, I mean, a lot of the public who maybe understandably don't follow the detail of the energy, energy press and the finer points in this, they'll be looking at it going, well, there's 400 jobs at Grangemouth, roughly 400 jobs at Mossmorran. These are happening roughly a year apart. There's a pattern developing here. And Ben, just to pick up on that now infamous slogan, a just transition, is it just one big meaningless term?
Well, I mean, a just transition, what they actually mean is a shutdown. The just transition means shut down the North Sea oil industry and a transition to it not being there anymore. Now, just is just, a woke, I hate to use that word, but a word that's been added to the shutdown to make it sound as though it's fair.
Well, transition is what it means. It's a switch from one state to another.
It's from an industry to not an industry.
But the transition is meant to be from one industry to another well-paid, highly skilled industry.
Well, that's not the case. Exactly, wind farms, by their very nature, operate themselves. You maybe need a handful of staff, but they operate themselves.
But I think it's possible for government to intervene to create a just transition. I don't think the phrase is meaningless. I think it's just not happening because of choices made by government. I think you can make a just transition from fossil fuels to renewables. I think it has to happen for the good of the planet, and it has to happen for the good of humanity and for the good of all of us. But
But
I don't see any sign of it actually happening.
But if it has to happen for the good of the planet and the good of humanity, it has to happen at the same time, because other countries aren't shutting down their oil industries and their fossil fuel industries. They're actually investing in them.
Yeah.
And we're shutting ours down. It makes no sense.
Yeah. I think Labour's intention is to get ahead of the curve, and GB Energy's big thing, their big flagship policy is this new GB Energy. I think the idea is to get renewables really motoring. And I think there is a future for renewables which could replace the jobs that are lost through fossil fuels. That will happen. But there needs to be much greater emphasis on making sure that transition does happen. I know you think probably you just keep burning fossil fuels till the planet dies. I don't think that's really an option. You know what I mean? But both Scottish and UK governments have failed these workers. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I think you need to keep going with fossil fuels for as long as we need them. You know, the industry and the country's changed so much already.
Yes.
That the amount of pollution. I know Mossmorran obviously had issues with flaring when I used to live in Edinburgh. You'd see the flames across
the locals who are not employed at Mossmorran, whose friends and family are employed at Mossmorran, hate Mossmorran.
Right.
But that's, I mean, obviously you can't have an industrial site if that's a beauty land spot. But I mean, just to make one point, though, I mean, you might remember Project Willow, which was obviously the sort of bringing together of the UK, Scottish governments, private industry to come up with a sort of future for Grangemouth specifically, not Mossmorran. But I read a report earlier saying that the first investors and projects of that will be announced before the end of the year. What that means in reality, I don't know. It could be something very small scale.
Yeah.
But I think that's the sort of example of like state investment that Mark mentions. You really need to knock heads together if we're going to keep skills, within the central belt